Hey everyone, welcome to this session about telephoto zooms for travel and landscape photography. So I'm collaborating with Primes and Zooms to do this session specifically because a telephoto prime, specifically this session is about 70 to 200 lenses. The f4 series are some of my favorite series of lenses to use for travel and landscape photography. I really like the kind of output I get from these lenses, and I've noticed over time that very few people prefer to use these lenses. So I wanted to make a case to you that perhaps you should consider it the next time you want to do something like landscape photography. Things are hopefully going to open up soon, and I've been saying this for the last year, but maybe this is the year things start to open up, and when it does, it might be a great idea to have this lens in your kit bag to take along with you for travel. So please feel free to put any questions you have during the session about the chat. About do you have a specific question about the 7200? With me, I have all the 7200 lenses that you should probably consider. So I have the Nikon one here. I have the Canon old 7200, which is the EF mount 7200. I even have the RF mount 7200, and I have another lens which I use on Sony bodies, which I will show you. So let's get started with the session. Can I have my presentation up, please? Okay, so everyone's seen the title already, so I'll just keep going. So give me a second. Okay, so why should you consider a medium telephoto lens? So I'm going to show you some of my images that are captured with a medium telephoto lens. Now there are different, of course, different telephoto lenses that you could use. You could just use a short telephoto prime, such as a 85mm. You could use a 100mm prime. But when you're traveling, I consider a telephoto zoom to be ideal, just because it gives you more options and it consolidates a bunch of your kit into one lens, basically a bunch of lenses into one lens, so that you have to carry less. And so these are some of the images I shot with the 7200. Now most of these images are actually shot with this lens. So this is a Nikon 72-200 f4, and some of them, and the other vast majority of them, would have been shot with this lens, which is the Canon EF 7200 f4. But I wanted to ignore what lens was used, what specific brand lens was used, what specific camera was used, but concentrate more on the unique perspective that you get from a 7200 lens. And you will see I'll show you several examples about why these images were not possible with other lenses. So the general information I get online, what I hear online, is for travel photography, for landscapes, you just get a wide angle lens and that solves everything. It does not. The wide angle lenses are great. It lets you capture large vistas. It lets you capture large sweeping landscapes. But there's a very noticeable disadvantage of the wide angle lens, which is that there's the effect of the wide angle perspective means that objects at a distance tend to look much smaller. So if you have a sweeping vista and you have great objects of interest in the foreground and the background, it might look great. But the issue is that subjects which are far away from you will always look smaller because of the way perspective works. In the case of a telephoto lens, telephoto lenses tend to compress perspective. They tend to make objects look similar in size and similar distances. So it's great for flattening out perspectives and abstract compositions, as well as of course making sure that large objects appear large in the frame. So if you look at this photo, this is the World Trade Center in New York City. I visited here almost every year for many years before of course we could stop, before we couldn't travel. But there's at least a kilometer between me and the World Trade Center. There's at least 4 or 5 kilometers. But between the World Trade Center and the coastline here, that's at least a kilometer and a half. At least, I don't remember exactly what it is. But you can notice that the distance has been compressed. They don't look so far away. And this is the effect of the telephoto lens. And this was shot maybe at 80 or 100 millimeters. And I was in what's called something called the Staten Island ferry. So it's a ferry which goes from the coast of New York City to Staten Island. So from there, I got this photo, and I also got the next photo, which I will just show right now. Why is this not moving? Yeah, there you go. So this is a much closer view of the World Trade Center shot from the same Staten Island ferry. That you can see how the composition is dramatically changed. It's become abstract. I've used the structure of the building and the geometry of the building to bisect the frame, which I thought was a very interesting composition. And there's a beautiful sky as well. So it becomes an abstract composition. Again, this is only possible with a telephoto lens. You could not get this shot with a wide angle lens because the perspective would be completely different. The field of view would be completely different. Right? So this is a shot I shot way back in, I think, 2013 or 14 in the foothills of Himachal. So you can see the mountain ranges, these hills are actually very far apart from each other. But the telephoto lens lets you compress the perspective. It lets you make everything look pushed together. So that gives you a very unique perspective. So my idea of this shot was to show the isolation of this little house here in relationship to all the hills and the mountains and the flowing clouds in the background. If I had shot this with a wide angle, this house would be extremely small. It might not even be visible. It would just be a point of light in the frame. So the impact would be lost about showing this house separated and isolated from the background. So that's why the telephoto was great here. Let me go to the next one. So this is another example of how the telephoto is actually pretty flexible considering all the tools that you have available in post-production. So this is a shot which I created in Iceland in 2019. There's my friend sitting here in the chair. He was enjoying a cup of coffee, I think, or having a smoke. I don't quite remember what he was doing at that point in time. But I realized that I could, instead of switching out to a wide angle, because we didn't have much time when it was raining, so I decided to just do a panorama. So this is a multi-shot panorama shot at 70 mm on my telephoto lens to get this perspective. And I wanted the leading line of the road to merge with him. So it draws your eye from him towards the road as if he's looking at the road and at the vista. So I could easily make a wide angle shot without having to switch lenses. You can't make a telephoto shot out of a wide angle lens. You cannot do that because there's no way for you to magnify it this way. You can, however, use a panorama to make a telephoto lens into a pseudo wide angle lens by just shooting a panorama. And with tools like Lightroom, such as Lightroom, Photoshop, you can very quickly stitch together a panorama. So the downsides of using a telephoto are fairly low, especially if you think, oh my god, I'll have to keep switching lenses if I want to shoot something like a wide angle shot, if I'm not getting enough space to use a telephoto. It's no longer really true. It just depends on how comfortable you are with your editing tools. So this is a photo I took at Yosemite Valley in the US, one of the most beautiful places in the world. Highly recommend everyone visits. So there are a series of photos from this place, and I'll just go through them. So again, this is a shot again made in Yosemite Valley. Now you can see how the moon looks extremely large in the frame, and each one of these trees, these small trees which you see next to the moon, though they look small, these are at least 15 to 20 meters tall. So they're very large trees, but the beauty of the telephoto lens is that it compresses the perspective. It makes it look like it makes all the distances look less obvious. So you get this beautiful shot where you can see the moon clearly, you can see the detail on the edge of the cliff really clearly, you can see the detail of the rock really clearly. So it makes a very beautiful and compelling image. I'll show you what this looks like in wide angle also later. So again, thanks to the telephoto lens, I could actually compose something like this very quickly. This shot again is one of those shots which is impossible in a wide angle. You just cannot shoot this frame because you cannot have these objects look so large in the frame unless you use a telephoto lens. Right, so these are the benefits. So again, this is Yosemite Valley one more time. This was shot at 200 mm, 150, 200 mm. So I got a tight frame, and you can see the shots before this. So this is a tighter frame. This is a 200. This one is about 150 to 100 mm, and this was shot at 70 mm. So you can see the difference in perspective you can get. And nowadays you have extremely high resolution cameras. So you will have, for example, if you have an EOS R5, you get 45 megapixels. Nikon Z7, Z7 II, you'll get 46, 47 megapixels. You have a A7R4, you'll get 61 megapixels and so on. So you get the additional ability to crop in a lot. So you get even more magnification. So this is an abstract photo I took of, I don't even really remember what this is. I think this was the Canadian Rockies. So I shot this from the seat of a plane. And that's another big benefit of having something small, a 70-200 lens, which is nice and small, because you can put it in your carry-on baggage. Right? So that's a really important consideration. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit, about why it's important to be able to carry these lenses easily. So this is shot out of a window of an aircraft. A big lens, you might have to check in You might not be able to carry it easily on a plane, but because I have access to that lens, I can make this shot right from a plane window. So it's a very big advantage to have. This is an abstract frame which I shot from, I think, one of the coastal regions of Scotland. So again, I found the frame very interesting because it's a beautiful transition from the rough tumultuous sea into the sky. So I like this, and this again is very difficult to do without a telephoto lens. If you shot a wide angle lens, the waves would look too small. You wouldn't be able to see this beautiful texture, and all those little dots you see is rainwater hitting the ocean. So it's just a beautiful scene. This is another example I wanted to show you about how a telephoto lens can double up as a wide angle lens when you don't have an option. Right, so this is a panorama I shot. I think it was 25 shots, shot at 70 mm. I saw this beautiful rainbow. I didn't want to switch out to my wide angle lens at that point because where we were, if you notice, there are storm clouds here. Where we were standing to shoot this photo, it was raining quite heavily, and I only had the 70-200 mounted. If I switched lenses, it would have been very awkward, and I was worried that I might miss the rainbow in the time it took me to switch. And you can see there are two rainbows here. So what I decided to do is instead I'll just shoot a panorama of the scene. So I shot a 15 or 20 shot panorama, and I got a beautiful wide angle frame out of this. Now the next shot I'm going to show you is what the telephoto of the same scene looks like. This is a telephoto view of the same scene. So you get this option of being able to get this beautiful shot of the rainbow actually hitting the city, and you get the option of this beautiful wide angle shot with the same lens without actually having to change anything. Right? So that's the beauty of having this telephoto lens available to you. This is a shot I created in Iceland, again where I wanted to layer the foreground, which is the trees, the mountains at a distance, and the clouds. I wanted to compress all that together so that the distances don't look so wide and the mountains look large because of large and imposing mountains. This is a shot I created in Iceland. So Iceland has these Icelandic horses. They're quite small, but they're very friendly. They run up right next to you. So it's a little scary when you see them the first time because they want some food. I guess the tourists keep feeding them or something, so they run up right next to you. But again, the horse was not close to me when I started shooting. The horse was pretty far away. And again, with a wide angle lens, the horse would look like a very small percentage of the frame. It wouldn't be noticeable in the frame. And the landscape is fairly bleak. There are no real compositional elements that you can use to draw attention to the horse in a wide angle frame. At least there weren't in this place. And again, I was standing right next to a fence. So if I'd shot it with a wide angle lens, the fence would have shown up in the frame. So that's why we didn't shoot this with a wide angle. I shot this with a telephoto. And you can see it works even for storytelling, right? You can see there's a horse in the background. This horse is running towards his friend out here. You can see the fence in the background. You get a sense of scene of the space as well. So just because you're shooting telephoto doesn't mean that you lose context of the scene. You can use a telephoto very effectively to communicate context as well as isolate a subject. So we can do both. This again is a landscape that I shot in Iceland. Again, the house, this red house, I saw it. It's quite far away. In real life, when you see it with your vision, the house would look pretty tiny, but it was very arresting. And there was a way to get here, but we weren't sure we could make it here very easily because you needed a pretty rugged 4-wheel drive car to get here. But I saw that structure and I thought I can get this shot and I can give it some context first by shooting it with a telephoto lens, which is what I did here. So you can see the little church here, you can see the background here, and you can see the hills, the imposing hills and the clouds in the background. And also you can get beautiful abstract photos with a 70-200. I just love shooting, I love shooting directly into the sun. I love shooting photographs where you get the essence of being in a place. So you can see the beautiful sunset happening here and the glow in the evening clouds. And the sun looks large in the frame. This is what it would look like with your vision. So when you look at something with your vision, it looks very different from when you photograph it. In your vision, the most important, your vision is basically accumulation of what you see plus your brain plus the environment. That all blends together to make a memory of the place. So what you see is not really what you remember. It's all those things mixed up which give you a memory of the place. And when you remember a sunset, you'll always remember the sun being very large in the sunset. You won't remember it being a point. You'll think, oh my God, it's so beautiful. There's a large sun in the sunset. If you shoot this with a wide angle lens, the sun will look extremely tiny. It'll look like a point in the sky. But the beautiful nature of the wide angle lens is you can magnify things at a distance, you can make things look large. So that's why the sunset looks beautiful here. And the next one is, those are all the photos I have. As I said, please put any questions you have in the chat about the images, and I will get to the next slide. So we discussed about why you should use telephotos for landscapes. Now I'm going to make a case about why you should use a 70-200 f4. Why you should use specifically this lens for your choice of telephoto lenses and not other lenses. So there are many other lenses you could use. So the main thing is the size and weight consideration, which I'll go over in a chart. But this lens, even though this looks quite large, right? So this lens is a 70-200. Now there's an adapter at the end, so just ignore the adapter. But this is a 70-200 Nikon, right? I can easily hold it in one hand. It doesn't weigh that much. It weighs about 850 grams, I think. This is half the weight of the 2.8 equivalent. Now you might be wondering, well, it's only 70-200, 2.8 weighs 1.5 kilos. This weighs maybe half. So I'm a big healthy man or woman. Why do I care about 700 grams? So I'll tell you why you should care. 700 grams is 2 more lenses. 700 grams is 2 more prime lenses that you can fit into your bag, right? So you can have more options while carrying the same amount of weight. And the downside from 2.8 to f4 is one stop of light. Now that one stop of light is not that big a deal, especially if you're shooting landscapes, which you'll be shooting in fairly good light, because in landscapes you have to look for good light, right? So using a 70-200 f4 like this is not a downside in that way, but it saves you a lot and it gives you the ability to carry more. And especially what my prediction for what's going to happen to travel is that now the volume of air travel has reduced, the number of passengers flying for leisure has reduced. Right, and depending on the governments that are involved in this, what will happen is, because of fewer opportunities to travel, airline tickets will rise, the prices of tickets will rise, and airlines will impose more and more severe restrictions on things like baggage. Not because they can't carry the baggage, but because they want to extract more money from you as a passenger, because they need to make up their margins. So they'll put more and more egregious limitations on carry-on baggage, because it's a very easy way to make money. And they'll make you pay more for check-in baggage. So weight is a real problem, and especially for landscape photographers, you have to hike to a place, you have to go walking up to a location where you can actually shoot something. So if you're doing that, the weight really matters. So it might not feel like a lot, but 700 grams and a few more things, carrying those over 10-15 kilometers is fairly painful. So weight savings is a really big deal. So the second thing is constantly improving high ISO performances. So this generation of cameras, I'm talking about all this current generation of basically mirrorless cameras now. So if you look at Z6 II, Z7 II, A7R4, A1, Canon EOS R5, R6, all these cameras have phenomenal high ISO performance, much better than it used to be even 3 or 4 years ago. So you're not going to lose much quality if you go from ISO 400 to 800. It's not going to be a very big deal, which is the difference between shooting at f2.8 and shooting at f4. So the high ISO makes up a lot of the shortcoming of losing one stop of light on your lens. Significant savings over most 2.8 options. By that I mean, forget the weight, it also costs half as much. So, and the savings which you make for that, for a lens which you don't need, you can put into buying more lenses. You can even buy an air ticket for that much, because I think the difference between a 70-200 and a 70-200 f4 and a 2.8 is almost maybe 1 lakh now. So for 1 lakh you could easily make a trip somewhere and get some beautiful photos. And the other really good thing about 70-200 lenses, if you notice, this is the 70-200 Canon lens. So this is weather sealed, internal zoom, beautifully made, and it's made up to pro standards. By pro standards I mean it's the build qualities, and this is the RF lens, which is, I'll come to this lens, this is spectacular, this lens is amazing. So these lenses are made up to the same standard as the more expensive 70-200 2.8 lenses. So the weather sealing is equivalent, the autofocus is extremely fast. It has all the pro features that you might expect, very good image stabilization and all these features. So the only thing you're really lacking is the f2.8 aperture, right? So that's the only difference. Now the other thing is, I'll get to the last point later, which is the mirrorless version versus the DSLR version. But these are the general reasons why I should prefer a 70-200 f2.4 for travel versus a 70-200 f4 versus a 2.8 for travel. Okay, so now this is just a slide. I'll share this presentation with you all about the size and weight savings, basically the weight savings. So on average, you can see that especially on the Canon EF, Nikon F and Sony, you are saving almost 40% of the weight. In Canon EF, the 7200 2.8 weighs almost double that of the f4. So you save a lot of weight. You save 30 or 40% of the weight, and so it's a really big deal. It might not sound like much, but it is a really big deal. So this is just some size comparisons of the 7200 f4 versus 2.8. These are the Sony lenses. For Sony, I have a different recommendation, which I'll get to in a bit. So this is interesting. So this is just a comparison of the EF versus the RF lenses. And those of you who are not familiar with these things, let me just show you. So this is an EF lens. This is a 7200 f4 EF lens. Right? This can only fit on Canon DSLRs. I'll just remove the hood so you can see it clearly. Right? This is a 7200 RF lens, f4. Now if I put them side by side, you can see the difference. Right? There's a huge difference, and this is without, so if I include the adapter, the difference is even bigger. Right? So if you're shooting EOS R, an RF series body, if you're shooting an R body, R6, EOS R, R5, I would not get this. I would not get this lens. Now some of you may say, yes, but it's a lot cheaper. I will show you, maybe the size doesn't seem like it's that big a deal to you. I'll explain why the size difference is really important. So this photo is basically these two lenses put vertically inside a camera bag. If you notice the RF lens, and this camera bag is not very big, this is one of my smaller camera bags. So the RF lens fits in vertically and I can close the bag. The EF lens has to be put in horizontally, so it basically takes up the space of 2 or 3 prime lenses, and that's it. You can't carry anything else. Right? So it takes up one entire section of the bag. If you take a 7200 2.8, it will take up one entire section of the bag. 1/3 of the bag will go in just carrying that lens. Whereas with the RF lens, because it can be put in vertically into your bag, you have space for everything else. So it's a big saving. And why is this important? Like I said, in the future, the airlines will be more restrictive. If you can fit more stuff into your carry-on bag, it's simpler, right? You don't have to carry an extra bag. You don't have to check in something important in your check-in bag. So all these things will help you keep your gear safe as well. So it's a one-time investment, I think, or if you're going to rent, maybe try out this RF lens. You will notice how much more convenient your life is. Of course, the only downside is that it's if you can magnify this view, is that it's not an internal zoom. It zooms out. But this doesn't make any difference. This is fine. You just zoom, when you pack it away, just keep it in this form and put it in your bag. Right? So it's a really good lens. It's perfectly it's beautifully weather sealed. It's beautifully made. The autofocus on the RF lens is better than the EF lens. So in every possible way, in every possible meaningful metric, the RF lens is better than the old EF lens, which is not a surprise. It should be. So now here are my recommendations for lenses in each camera system if you want to shoot with a medium telephoto lens for travel. So this is for EF, which is the DSLR, Canon DSLR, if you have a 5D Mark IV or any camera prior to the 5D Mark III, etc. So one, of course, is this one, the Canon EF lens. The second one is the 70-300 f4 to 5.6 Is Usm, which is this lens here. This is also a really good lens. I used to have this lens. It's very simple. It's smaller. It's shorter than the 70-200, but unfortunately, it's long enough so you can't pack it vertically. It has to be packed horizontally. But you get the benefit of getting a 300 mm instead of a 200 mm, which is good in some ways, but it's a bit slower. You lose one more stop of light, so you go from f4 to 5.6. And the third option is a very is the cheaper option. So this is the 70-300 f4 to 5.6. This is not an L lens, so the weather sealing will not be as good, the autofocus will not be as good, but optically it's quite nice, at least from what I saw in the review. So this is another option if you can't get access to these two lenses. Of course, when you go to the RF mount, there's only one option, which is the 70-200 f4 LIS, the RF 70-200 f4 LIS, which is the lens which I just showed you. Fantastic lens, highly recommended. I've tested this over the last few days and I've been genuinely impressed with it in every way. It's a fantastic lens. Going to the Nikon F and Z recommendation. Now, unfortunately, currently Nikon does not have a native 70-200 f4. They have an f2.8, but they do not have an f4. So your only option is to mount an adapter. Now, the issue with the adapter is, if you can just bring this up on the big screen. is the additional length that this adds to the lens. So this entire portion of it is the adapter. If you look at the lens, I'll just take the hood off so you can see the whole lens. Right, if you look at the lens, this external, this part of it adds a bit of size to the lens. Now, if you got a Nikon Z and most of your lenses are f-mount lenses, if you're using DSLR lenses, then it doesn't matter because the adapter will basically be stuck on your camera. You won't be taking off the adapter. If you have a majority of your lenses are Z-mount lenses, then this might become a little bit of an issue because you'll only be using the adapter for this lens, which means that it will add that much extra size and you'll have to remember to carry this. If you forget the adapter, you just can't use the lens. So it's really, it's quite irritating. But the lens is spectacular. It's a very good lens. Most of the photos which I showed you were actually made with this lens. And Nikon also has a very nice, reasonably priced 7300 f4 5.6. So f4 to 5.6 EDVR. This is also a very good lens. So if you can't get access to this guy, that's a good option. It's the 70-300 is actually smaller and lighter than the 7200, but you lose one stop of light. So that's a downside. For Sony, it's interesting. So Sony has a 70-200 f4, which is a good lens. It's a great lens, but the beauty of the Sony ecosystem is the variety of lenses that you can get. You can get lenses from every manufacturer. So you can get Sigma, you can get Tamron, you can get Laowa, you can get Voigtlander, in addition to the first party lenses. So there are two recommendations I have. So Sony has a 70-200 f4 native lens. It's not as small as the Canon lens. It's more like a normal 70-200 that you get on Canon EF or Nikon F mount. But Tamron has made this lens. So let me just show you this lens. So this is my lens. I actually own a copy of this lens. So this is a Tamron 70-180, but it's an f2.8. Now I want you to see this. So this is an f2.8 lens. This is an f4 lens. Right? So you can see that the f2.8 lens is actually smaller than the 70-200 f4 lens. It's actually so small that it's quite comparable to the RF 70-200 f4 lens. Right? So it's a very small lens and it has the benefit of being an f2.8 lens, and the weight is also quite low. Oh, hello. Yeah, hi. Sorry. So it looks like we lost audio. I think I got audio back again. Yeah. So what I was saying is this is highly recommended just because even though it does not have image stabilization, most bodies nowadays that you would put this on, so this goes on Sony bodies, most Sony bodies have built-in stabilization. So I use this on an A7R3 and an A1. It works beautifully. The stabilization works well. The stabilization does not work as well as native stabilization in the lens. So if you compare stabilization, this system, this is an EOS R, which does not have stabilization. This lens has stabilization. This combination works better than this on an A7 III, just for stabilization. Right? So it's great. Now, the other thing is, why is the lightweight of a lens like this or a 70-200 f4 another reason why it's important? Those of you who are interested in astrophotography and who are using astro trackers, a lot of astro trackers have a weight limit. If you use a lens like a 70-200 2.8, it exceeds the weight limit of the astro tracker. Or some gimbals also will not be able to take it, but a 70-200 f4 will work well. So these are all the factors which go into why you should use the 70-200 f4, right? So it's a tremendously useful lens for a large series of use cases, as you've seen from the photos, right? So this is the case I wanted to make to you all for considering a 70-200 f2 f4 lens. It's a fantastic option for travel, fantastic option for landscapes. It doesn't take up too much space in your bag. It's not as expensive as buying a 2.8 lens, and it has all the best features of a 2.8 lens except, of course, a maximum aperture. Right? So if you have any questions, I'll wait a few minutes in the chat. Otherwise, we will wind up for the day, and you can always reach out to me on Facebook, on Instagram, wherever, if you have more questions about this travel setup. And maybe later I can do a session about what I carry for my landscape setups when I do get a chance to travel. Right, so I'll just stop and answer any questions. Please leave any questions and comments using the chat. Okay, I can see a few questions here. Uh, Abhijit Yashwant asks, what shall I go for with a 90D Tamron 100, 150 to 600 or Canon 100 to 400? So I've only used the Canon 100 to 400. I have no experience using the Tamron 150 to 600, and I thought the 100 to 400 is a fantastic lens. There are two versions of it now, and there's a different version. There's a 100 to 500 on EOS RF mount. Uh, I honestly would, if you're going, so it's context sensitive. If you're going to be photographing animals which are moving a lot, if you're going to be doing birding, I would recommend you go for the Canon 100 to 400, not the Tamron, just because my understanding is that the autofocus will just work better on the 100 to 400. Whereas if you're photographing more static animals, for example, if you're photographing lions and tiger, if you're photographing the tigers in Tadoba, who was fairly static and they're just resting, and then you shoot the photo, then the extra magnification of the 600 will be more useful to you. So that's my recommendation. Rohan asks how to make a panorama image using a 70-200 lens. All right, so there are two aspects of it, right? So there's how you shoot the image, and the second part is how you combine those images. So how you shoot the image is just how you shoot any other panorama. I don't know how to make it more obvious, but basically you make a grid, right? You shoot individual shots in a grid. And then you just sort of a sense that there's overlap between each photo. I like to use about 33% overlap. So if one frame is there, the next frame overlaps that frame by about 33%, right? So then it's easy for the software to put it together. And if you have Lightroom, then what you do is you can just select all those photos in Lightroom, right click on it and say merge to panorama, and it'll just do it right there in Lightroom, and it'll give you a TIFF file. Sorry, it'll give you a DNG file at the end of it. So it's a really simple process. You should just try this out if you have Lightroom, and you'll see how simple it is. It's so simple that nowadays I just prefer shooting panoramas instead of carrying a wider lens. So I don't have an ultra wide lens in my bag anymore. The widest lens I carry right now is a 24 and if I need wider, I'll just shoot a panorama very quickly. So that's an answer. Which one, Anil asks, which one is better for a portrait shoot, 70-200 f4 or f2.8? I would say the 2.8 is just better because it will give you more isolation. And he asks, can I explain this in the context of new mirrorless lenses like the EOS R5 or 6? So, Anil, it doesn't matter if you're using a DSLR or using R5 or R6. A 70-200 will look like the other 70-200. Of course, one might be sharper, one might have better bokeh, but the field of view will be very similar, and the depth of field will be the same, right? So if you want that isolation, if you want to isolate the subject from the background, I would always say just get the f2.8 lens. You'll be happier with it. Now, the context of the discussion we are having right now is about travel photography, where you have to go somewhere with a lens, right? For portraits, for example, for wedding portraits and all, you would just use the 70-200 2.8 will be better. But for me, I don't even use that. For me, when I shoot when I shoot portraits, I prefer using prime lenses. I shoot 85 1.4, I shoot 105 1.4. The reason is with a 200 lens, you're very far apart. You're very far away from the subject to get the full body or the full head. Right? So you'll have to be at least 10 meters away. So at that distance, I cannot communicate to the person clearly. And I want to when I shoot portraits, I like to engage with the subject. I like to talk to them. I like to give them specific directions about what I want. And it's very difficult when I'm shooting 200 So I prefer to be close up, 105, 85 Sometimes I'll shoot portraits with a 50 or a 35. So I'm right up close. that it gives me the ability to understand and draw out certain emotions from the subject. So I don't prefer shooting 70-200 2.8, but if you like that kind of look and you want to shoot a 200, the 2.8 is better than the f4. Swapnil says Nikon 7200 was launched in 2012. Should we wait for the newer version to launch? Oh wow. Okay, so that's a really really good question. It's an old lens. It does not have a native Z mount equivalent. So here's the deal. I would not buy anything which is not native Z mount now. If you have a Z mount camera, if you have a mirrorless camera, don't bother adapting. Get native. Because what's going to happen is in 5, 6 years, there won't be any DSLRs. I guarantee it. This was something which started in 2018. I remember having this discussion with a friend way back in 2018 when 17 or 18 when the Nikon D850 launched, saying that this is going to be the last DSLR that Nikon makes. This is the last greatest DSLR that anyone's going to make, right? And it's what's happened now. You don't see any DSLR launches except from odd ones like Pentax. So, as good as this lens is, this is a great lens. It's been one of my favorite lenses. It's difficult for me to recommend that you buy. Rent it for sure, because then you don't waste your own money on it, right? It's difficult for me to recommend that someone buy this lens just because Nikon might just come out with a new one on Z mount, and then you'll feel terrible for having this, right? So because it is out of date. It's a great lens, but you can see the problem, right? So to use this, I have to carry an adapter. When I carry an adapter, the whole thing becomes too big, and then I have to remember to carry the adapter. If you are using a DSLR and you intend to keep using DSLR for 4 or 5 years, feel free to buy this. This is a safe purchase to buy because they're not going to upgrade this. I do not believe that this will be updated. I believe that this will just be relegated. It'll be obsoleted, and you'll have a Z mount lens. You won't have any F mount lens after this. That's my belief. Of course, I don't work for Nikon, so I can't say for certain. Okay, so then Swapnil says, do we need to carry a tripod while shooting with the 200 focal length? So Swapnil, all the photos which I showed you, every single photo that I showed you, I did not use a tripod. There's only actually one photo which I used a tripod, which is the, I'll show you which one I used. Hold on. This is the only photo I used with a tripod, right? Because I wanted the long exposure. But if you are concerned that for regular shooting there'll be shake, no, because all these lenses come with stabilization. Even the Tamron, this Tamron which does not have stabilization, the body has stabilization. So you don't. So I've shot. I'll give you a good metric for this. So I'll show you the best one. This is the best one, right? This has the best stabilization. So this, I tested this yesterday. I could shoot this at 200 at 1/10 of a second. It's perfectly sharp, no problem, right? So that gives you a sense of how good these are. Uh, with stabilization, you don't really need a tripod, but if you intend to do long exposures, if you tend to do astrophotography, yeah, then you need a tripod. But here's the good thing, because these lenses tend to be smaller and lighter, your demand on the tripod head is much less. So with a 200 lens, you need to put the tripod foot on it and then mount it on the tripod foot. Actually, you will need to do it with the longer old-fashioned 7200 as well. But with the new ones, with this, you don't need to use a tripod foot. You can just mount it on the camera, and it's fine. It's not heavy enough to tip over. Right? So that's my. It's like a long answer. It's a good question, but for most things, you will not need a tripod head, a tripod. Right. Any other questions, guys? We'll wait for a minute if you have any other questions. Otherwise, we will just wind up for the day. I don't think there are any other questions. Nope. Okay. I don't think there are any more questions, so we will wind up for the day. As always, if you have any questions about these lenses which we showed you, or in general, feel free to reach out to me. If you want to try out any of these lenses, all the lenses I've shown you right now are available for rent at Primes and Zooms. This 7200 and body, I've actually, Primes and Zooms has kindly provided this one to me. So this lens is actually my lens, the 7200 f4. So you know that I'm actually using these, and the Tamron one is mine. So I've used these firsthand, and I know that they're excellent lenses. Right?
All right. That's it. Thank you, guys. I will see you in the next session.